My name is Monk Rowe, and we're in Danbury, Connecticut. I'm very pleased to have Pete Levin with me today for the Jazz Archive. And I was looking at your resume and so forth, and I'm wondering, if you have a business card, what does it say on it?
Business card?
Yes. How do you promote yourself?
I do have one, just my name and a line drawing of me and a phone number.
Really?
That's it. That's all that's there.
Because you do so many things, I'm wondering if you have a reputation now as one particular, in your electronic field, or as a jazz player or arranger.
I think probably not in one particular field, because I've gone into a lot of areas as a sideman and as a writer. In fact, for a long time, I've always been based out of New York. For a long time, there was a large segment of people who knew me as a jazz player and never hired me for anything else, like a pop gig of some kind, although I've done a lot of them, with small names and with big names, but the two things never met somehow. And way back in my roots, I'm a classically trained French horn player, the master's in Juilliard.
Yeah.
So I've got a strong background in classical, and I actually orchestrate the stuff. I write for orchestra and large ensembles. But nobody in the jazz world is aware of that, so I got a bunch of different people. Depends on who you talk to.
Yeah. I wonder if they'd be surprised to know that you have these other lives, actually.
Maybe, I don't know if I was surprised or not. They just don't. If somebody in the jazz world is thinking, well, I need somebody who can write for strings, they wouldn't think to call me, even though I was next to them on the bandstand the night before. So
right. Well, you lived in Boston, grew up in Boston, and did you have a musical family because your brother is a musician also?
Well, my parents loved music very much. They're both fans. And my dad had a nice singing voice and played the violin when he was a kid, but they were not really. They weren't involved with music at all. They just loved it, and my brother and I, Tony, picked up on that, I guess. And also the school system we went to in Brookline had a great music department, and some really good teachers, in the system, that's invaluable. That's so great because it inspires kids to. If it's in you at all, they'll bring it out. They'll give you an opening. You go into the opening, and that's it.
Yeah.
And here we are. Well, we went wrong. So we're musicians. Yeah.
You didn't pick a particularly easy instrument in the French horn.
No, although I have the theory that there's no such thing as an easy instrument. Some of them, you get started on it easily. Piano, obviously, you don't have to play in tune. You just you hit buttons and sounds come out. Guitar, if you can tune it, you can get some chords pretty easily. But and you can strum, get a groove going, sing along with it, get an amp and play with a blues band.
Yeah.
But there's a point eventually you have to cross of really achieving something musical on any instrument, and that's going to take practice, and it's going to take development of skills and learning more about the style that you want to play in and the instrument that you're playing, and a whole lot of hours of practicing. I think there's a line you got to cross, and if you don't cross it, you're always going to be. There'll always be so many people better than you are, then you just won't work. So all instruments are hard, I think, but French horn is kind of treacherous. I think I started it originally because a lot of people were telling me that it was an unusual instrument. It's hard to play, so if you play the French horn, you'll always have work. You'll always be able to get into the band because they need French horn players. Right? I guess that was true to a certain extent. And I worked it. I actually got good at it, and then decided I wanted to do something else. So.
Did the decision to become a professional musician, was it always obvious for you, or was there a kind of a turning point?
It wasn't obvious. I went to Boston University, a School of Fine and Applied Arts at the time. And there was a music school, but their main focus was on music education, not on performance. so I got a degree and expected to teach because that's what I was being advised to do by guidance counselors. I said, well, you can study music, but you should get the teaching degree so you have something to fall back on, which is like, that's always been a sore spot for me. I think that's the worst reason for being a teacher that I can think of. Would you want somebody like that teaching your kids? Well, I got this degree to make sure I'd be working.
That's a good point.
But I was advised a lot in school, and made sense to me at the time. So I got an education degree and finished. And I kind of sensed there was a gap in my performance experience. I just said, well, before I teach, let me go on to Juilliard. I'll just get another degree or whatever. Let me just play some more. And that put me into the New York scene, and I started playing with better ensembles, and on the side, subbed for Gil Evans, and discovered this whole new world, and finally realized I don't want to teach. That's not what I was doing. So I got there eventually. I didn't know from the beginning. Is the short answer.
Yeah.
Sorry, I took so long to get there. But
I'm wondering what your musical tastes, about the time you went to Juilliard, what music were you passionate about at that time?
Classical, I think. I listened to jazz. I was a Dave Brubeck fan at the time, who was it was on the pop charts at the time.
Yeah.
I'd listened to Dave, and I was messing with piano a little bit and trying to play like Dave and copying all this stuff, and Oscar Peterson. But mainly I was into classical. I still listen to it a lot. I'm still an opera fan. If I'm in the car, it's usually tuned to a classical station. I think that's I'm passionate about all kinds of music if it's being done well, but I think mostly classical. So.
Yeah. Your tastes seem to be pretty wide-ranging. I'm curious how this Hammond Organ thing came about.
I was in the Army in the late 60s, and I had been playing jazz piano in school, just on the side, and I got into the Army. I was looking for ways to play, and there was a Hammond organ at the the unit.
Yeah.
Well, it was actually at the band rehearsal hall, where I was stationed, and somebody else had been using it, and he cranked it up for me once and showed me how it works. And wow, this is pretty nice. And I started playing with R&B groups after that, and playing organ. It's a great instrument. It's got this sound. It's like a human voice, I think. Just the aesthetics of it. Obviously, it isn't. It's electronic, but it just has that vibe to it. It's still my favorite keyboard instrument. It's the one that does the most for me here. It's a long turnaround, and I've owned a lot of keyboard instruments. I still do. I mean, now I just get them in modules, and they're like the 6-foot racks of synths. And I went through a long period of my favorite bands were the ones where they would let me play organ. And now there's a resurgence. It's great. It's back. Now everybody wants you to do it.
Right.
And my problem is moving my Hammond to a gig, which I can't lift it anymore. So.
Right. Who are your favorite organists?
There's a lot of them. Jimmy Smith, obviously, but I'm blanking. You can edit this, right?
Groove Holmes, guys like that, or
Larry Young.
Larry Young.
Yeah. Sometimes I could get a lot of coffee and I'm racing, and then my thoughts get left. Larry Young is it's just amazing. There was a big turnaround for me, I think somewhere in the 70s, because I'd been listening to Jimmy Smith like everybody and trying to emulate him, which of course you can't do, but it's fun to try, and there's just so much spirit in his playing. And I went to remember the concert. I don't remember who was headlining it, but John McLaughlin was the opening act. This was Tony Williams. It was originally the Tony Williams Lifetime.
Right.
The first.
John McLaughlin.
You're making me think about stuff. This is Tony Williams' original Lifetime, and he had discovered John McLaughlin, and John was up there in a cardigan jacket and a tie. He looked like a dork. But nobody knew who he was. So Tony had found it, and he was playing the most amazing stuff. And it was Tony and John and Larry Young. And Larry was playing a B3, but not through a Leslie. He had this. It was an amp. It was a big guitar amp. It was a Baldwin guitar amp, which I knew because I'd seen it in the music store. It was a wacky-looking thing that nobody was buying. It was, I'm sure, a big disaster for the company. But that's what he used, and he was just the exact opposite of what Jimmy was like. He used it as to create textures. The organ, that's not the amp. He used the organ to create textures and different sounds. Technically, he was a tremendous player, but he just was not going, the soul groove organ thing at all. And I walked out of that thinking that, damn, what have I been doing all these years? Just wrong. And I started to track down his stuff. So that was a complete turnaround for me. I still listen to him a lot. So really tragic that we lost him so soon. I can't imagine what he'd be doing now.
He was only, in his 30s or something?
Something like that. But he was just doing such incredible stuff for the duos with Elvin Jones, and wow. Just wow. So, Larry, if you're listening, thanks.
Yeah. How did you get into the arranging, the composing, the writing of themes for people and all that? How do you make those contacts?
I've, for the most part, been a hired gun in those areas. There's a lot of writing that I do that I have done that's for me direct with a client. A client can be a wide range of areas. Most often they've been through producers or production companies who know me. They've either used me as a musician or just know what I can do, and they
But in the very beginning, did you started writing tunes? How did you get to be known as someone who could do that?
I don't remember.
I mean, you don't have to tell me specifically, but is it just meeting the right people?
I think so. It's probably the same process as just going into an area as a musician and becoming an active musician. You just get into the scene, you hang out with people and meet them, play with them, and everybody learns what the other guy can do, or can't do, or does well, does not too well. And, most of the music scene, it's probably why so many of us stay poor. A lot of it is done by word of mouth. A lot of agreements are made with a handshake. Musicians are not good businessmen generally. But the music scene in New York was thriving when I got there in the 70s. And I met a lot of people early on. I got interested in synthesizers in the early 70s. And, for some reason, I had an affinity for that, and nobody else could figure them out, which was great for me. So I was doing a lot of session work when Star Wars came out. I was doing a lot of just playing as a sideman on a lot of jingles, radio and TV commercials, and there was a period where I was just going from studio to studio all week with a small Moog synthesizer, and my job would be to do laser shots or spaceship flyby. That was it. $56, please, thank you, with residuals.
That's right. Do you still get Star Wars residuals? I mean,
Oh, no.
Okay,
No,
I
no.
just was curious.
No, this could be. It was just a style. I mean, it could be
Yeah.
a toilet paper commercial, but they.
Oh, like
but
the
it was
flushing sound
It
or
was
something?
hip to have space noises
I see.
going on because Star Wars was really big.
Was this a mini Moog?
It was a mini Moog, which
Yeah.
I still have.
Yeah.
I've actually sold very few of my instruments, or some I gave away. Some of them are, a lot of them are vintage and are still sitting in my garage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how much use they are. I mean, I can't think what to do with them.
Right.
And I can't imagine how much value. They have value to some people, I'm told.
They do.
But,
There's the, you know.
I guess people. I don't know what they do with them when they buy them. But they're really limited. But they're fun to have. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'll
Was
open one
this
up
the
and play
same
with it.
mini Moog that I guess you took on a Gil Evans gig?
Mhm.
Is that right? Now,
That's it.
what prompted you to do that?
My first stint with Gil Evans, I was playing French horn,
Mm-hmm.
and actually got the gig. Oh, I got a lot of stories. How much tape you got? But that's one of my favorites. That's the greatest. Def one of the 3 or 4 greatest gigs I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
I got it. Gil was doing a week at the Village Vanguard, and the horn player was coming in from New Jersey, and he came all the way into town, and he forgot his mouthpiece. And he was. I think he didn't want to do it anyway because there was a lot of work in the '70s. Everybody was really busy, and his reaction was, "Oh, I don't need this anyway." He just went home. And I knew a couple of guys in the band, and I got this panic call. They said, like, "Come down to the Vanguard, like now." And I made it for the second set, and that's it. I was in the band for 15 years.
Oh,
it was great.
fantastic.
But the thing, they were even back then. I don't remember how big the band was, but probably 14, 15 guys, and a lot of great soloists were in that band. I mean, guys who have been heavy influences on the jazz scene, going way back. I think Howard Johnson, Johnny Coles, Jimmy Knepper, I think was in the band at that point. I don't remember whether Dave Sanborn was playing with it at that. I think that came a little bit later, but Lenny White was the drummer at that point, and Herb Bushler was playing bass. And,
Lou Soloff was in the band.
I think that was before Lou.
Uh-huh.
It's really close. And
Yeah.
Joe Beck played guitar with him somewhere in that period, on and off. Joe was having a lot of trouble with his eyes, so sometimes he just didn't want to make club gigs. But who else? Billy Harper, Trevor Kohler. Well, it goes on. But there were a lot of really strong soloists, and there were guys who would stand up and take 20 choruses, and it would be worth it. It was great. So I'm sitting there as a horn player, and this went on for a while. We'd play ahead, and then there would be 20 minutes of soloing. And there wasn't a whole lot to do. That had been going on for, I don't know, a year or so, and I was getting interested in synthesizers and was using them.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to Gil about it, and he said, "Oh, why don't you bring one to a gig? Try some things." And I brought it, and with an amp, it gave me something to do, in between ensemble sections. And Gil liked it and started writing little pieces for it. So I was playing, the horn and mini Moog over here. Then what? Oh, I started bringing a clavinet, because guitar players, sometimes you had one, sometimes not, or somebody wouldn't show up. So I thought, well, I'll play some chords on a clavinet and behind the soloist, and I got the mini Moog. And eventually I was bringing so much keyboard stuff that it was hard for me to get back to the horn. So John Clark joined the band at that point, so we kind of switched, and I started playing second horn.
Oh.
Because John's great anyway, and I just started focusing on keyboard. Then I stopped bringing the horn.
Was there any noise, no pun intended, from the musicians' union about the rise of synthesizers in the studio?
Yeah, there was a lot. The union, their focus has always been uh, their boundaries are defined by things that they understand, which are as traditionally has been like Broadway shows, weddings, club dates, and they never really related well to the recording scene. They're actually better at it now, but by the time they caught up, it was too late. But, I remember in the '70s, there was an instrument called the mellotron, which was a keyboard instrument. It was a bear. It was a real beast, but each key was connected to a strip of recording tape. So you press the key, and the recording tape would be pushed down on a capstan, a rotor, and the tape would play. And this noise would only last, I think it was 7 or 8 seconds or something. But right. It was an actual recording of violin or a flute. In reality, the recordings, first of all, weren't very good, and also the tapes would start stretching almost immediately. So this thing it didn't sound anything like a string section. It had its own sound, which the Beatles used it a lot, but they used it it goes back to George Martin's skill as a producer, but they always used it in ways that they weren't trying to sound like a string section. They did the effect of strings doing some things. So it came out and there was a big splash. It was a very expensive instrument. And clearly it was not going to replace any string players because it was just a beast. It was always out of tune. It was the action. There was no action at all. It was impossible to play anything, play a run, forget it. It was useless. But at the Union, after a while, it took him like 6 months to a year, but suddenly they came out with this edict: mellotrons are illegal on sessions because it's going to put string players on the word. They completely missed the point that everybody tried it, said this thing's terrible. We're not going to use it. Nobody wanted to use it except as an effect. That's kind of where they've been at. Synthesizers, it took them a long time to understand them. They're really capable of a lot of unique sounds that couldn't be done by other instruments, but there was a certain amount of imitating of other instruments, which was a sore spot with musicians. I think musicians were more angry than the Union, which it took them years before they took any kind of a stance, and then it didn't really matter.
Well, there have been circumstances where you could replace a string section with
it's
a synthesizer.
Trying to remember when the first one hit. There's a device called a sampler, which is really not a synthesizer, and it has nothing to do with the tradition of, or the lore, or the background, or the genealogy of the synthesizer, which is an electronic instrument, and goes back to the stuff that Robert Moog built years ago, and which was designed to make unique electronic sounds. The sampler is the only similarity is that it's controlled by a keyboard. It essentially records instruments, records them very well into computer memory, and you configure it to respond properly. You play a middle C on a keyboard, a recording of a trumpet or whatever, or a violin section, playing middle C gets played back. In the right circumstances, it's not even possible to tell the difference because it is a very good digital recording of the instruments. Right. The effect of that has been overwhelming. I mean, to the music industry, I think, or as far as not the music industry, to just to musicians as a group, as far as musicians being replaced by other devices. So it's been an economic changeover. It's been going on really for, I'd say, close to 20 years, which is my first sampler, which was a very impractical device. It was it was $3,000 or $4,000, I think, but it only had 8 voices, almost no memory, only worked on floppy disks. But it was the first affordable But at the time, it was the thing to do, and I got a lot of use out of it. I had a huge library for it. I've had it hanging around for years. I just gave it away to Kenwood Denard because he was using it as part of his electronic rig. Still is.
Wow.
It was the same model, and he had a lot of his own sounds on it. It was just triggering some unusual percussion sounds that he had made. And he was on a gig somewhere, and it just went up in smoke. and I had a date coming up where I was playing with his band, and he told me about it. He didn't know what he was going to do. I said, "Look, I got one. It's hanging around here." And that's what happens to my vintage instruments.
You could probably have a museum someday.
It's like, I don't know. My garage is a museum. I have to clean out my garage. So maybe that was a good start.
Yeah.
Call Kenwood.
Well, tell me about some of these. I don't know if these things have any particular significance or not, but some of the compositions you've done, some of the jobs, the United Nations Summit, Earth Summit theme in '92.
That was nice. It was
sounds like a nice gig.
Yeah, it was. Over the years, I've always said, being a musician, any musician, you talk to, whether it's this way, on camera, or just hit them in a bar. They can start telling stories, and you'll have trouble getting out of the room. They go on forever.
Yeah.
Any musician can do that. I've always thought that. First of all, I think I'm lucky, very fortunate to be an active performing musician. Other than the fact it's something that I love, and people actually pay me money to do it, which never ceases to amaze me. And the phone usually rings, which never ceases to amaze me. But I've always felt that musicians, especially because they get to travel and you never work in the same place twice. Well, sometimes you do, but you work in so many different places. It's not like you're going to your office every day.
Yeah.
It's always different. So you get into a lot of unique situations, and there are a lot of unique opportunities, and you never know what's going to happen when the phone rings. It could take you anywhere, to some country you'd never been to before, or to playing a style of music that you'd never played before, and it's just all kinds of possibilities. That United Nations thing, I had underscored a documentary from somebody I met as a writer and producer and organizer. His name is Pranay Gupta. He's Indian, obviously, but he's been involved with the United Nations for years and was doing documentaries about India. He's a good documentary filmmaker, and I don't even remember how I met him. Honestly, I think I was working for somebody else, and I met him. It's that kind of interface thing happens. But I met him, and I did a couple of low budget TV documentaries for him. And he came back to me one day and said, "What he's involved with the Earth Summit coming up for the UN." And I thought it'd be nice, we should have some music. So I thought, "Pete, why don't you write something?" I said, "Well, sure, okay." I didn't know what it was going to come to. I wrote a kind of anthem-y piece, and I got a friend involved, a sax player, singer named Pat Bianco, that I've done pop gigs with, and even a few weddings, and he helped with the lyrics, and we put this thing together, and went into the studio and recorded it, and it was passed around the UN, and then Pranay called back and said, "Listen, there's a big gathering in the General Assembly come up. Why don't you come and perform it?" I said, "Wait a minute, you talking about the General Assembly? That one, the one with the yeah, it was we did it actually 3 or 4 times. One of them, they were dedicating a huge artwork that Artie Rauschenberg, artist, had just done, and so they opened the whole event with Pat and I sitting there. We got just piano and sax and vocal, and we played it to I don't know, a couple of thousand people, and of like dignitaries from all over the world just sitting and watching. Pat also shaves his head, so a couple of ball guys sitting up there, just into it, doing what we do. Robert Rauschenberg, I remember he was sitting on the end of the diet, and he's known for taking a nip or two, and he was just kind of sitting there watching with this big grin on his face, going like this. He was having a great time, and then Mario Cuomo got up and he started his speech about saying how great it was to come off the street where everything's hectic and just have some music to start with. It was great. I mean, I never made a nickel from it. I think I would have been embarrassed if I did. And they went on to the big summit in Rio, which we were not involved in, but just the experience of playing in the General Assembly was pretty amazing. And it happened again, but that's...
Yeah, and you go from something like that to Food Channel TV series, So when you get contracted for something like this, does the producer have suggestions for you?
Yes. These days, more suggestions than we'd probably like to
than you
take.
want.
That particular one is the Bobby Flay show, or his original show. It was actually the director who came. It was somebody. His name was Wayne Page. Was a TV director that I've worked with. I've known him for years and done odds and ends projects for him. This was a case where he was doing Hot Off the Grill. It was Bobby's first show, and they just wanted a theme at me, so he came to me and sat and watched over my shoulder while I created it, and that was it. It was fun. It was fun to do. It was actually a low budget production. The Food Channel doesn't pay any residuals, so I didn't get too deep into it. There's a lot of that on cable TV, which is unfortunate, but
it's a one shot.
There are a lot of cable channels, very successful ones, who don't. They're not signatory to anything. Musicians unions, actors unions, ASCAP, BMI. They just don't sign the contracts, and which all the stuff has been taken for granted, which the big networks all do. They just don't do it. I mean, they realize they can get, they can get music and performances for nothing. Just don't agree to anything, and you got it. Another typical example is I've done Saturday Night Live a couple of times with the guest music artist. Most recent was with Annie Lennox a few years ago when she was doing a promo tour. We did Saturday Night Live, and
you were as a member of her band.
Yeah, and NBC reran it that summer as just part of their rerun segment, and everything was on union contract, and we got paid for it. Which is, hey, we're doing this for a living. This is what it is. That's the concept. But the Comedy Central reruns that show once a month or so, and they don't pay residuals. So that's more the norm, I'm sorry to say.
How come somebody can't do something about that?
If they try, it's not easy. I mean, it takes a big legal fight, and ASCAP and BMI especially, they get to these things as they can, but it's the whole music industry has changed so massively in the last 10, 15 years. As technology changes, the whole pattern of the way people are purchasing music changes.
Yeah.
It just, right now, we just saw the Napster stuff go down, which was confusing, just even for the people involved and for the rest of us just watching. Was this good? Is it bad? I don't understand. I don't get it. And where did it come down? And even the way it came down was complicated, and with facing some realities. Okay, they lose in this country, but it's just a website. They could They could just start the website up in France or something that doesn't subscribe to the same copyright laws. They could just do it from there. And so for people who are writing music and hoping to get paid for it, are stopping and thinking, God, what are we doing for a living?
Well, let me ask you about that. And as somebody who obviously writes a lot of music and records a lot, how do you feel about people taking your stuff for nothing?
Well, it's well, I don't like it obviously, but it happens. It happens a lot. There's just in many ways. There's the concept of bootlegging, for instance, has been going on for years, which is somebody just makes an illegal copy or an illegal recording of something, illegal being without permission, and they distribute it or sometimes sell it, sometimes just pass it around. It seems innocent on a one-shot basis, but one way or another, one way or another, to some degree, it's costing some musician somewhere or a composer,
I guess, yeah,
$1 or $2. And if it gets widespread enough, it definitely has an impact. And I think people don't realize it. I think it's the same concept of the way people copy software and pass it around, computer software. It doesn't seem like a big deal. If you bought it and then make a copy for a friend or something, it doesn't really feel like stealing. People who do it are not thieves. They're nice people. It's hard to see the impact that it's having on a whole industry when you do it. I had some help doing it, but I contributed to it. But somewhere on my website, there's a discography of stuff that I've done, or stuff that I can remember doing. Not that mine is. There are people with much bigger discographies, but there's a lot of stuff on there. And as I traveled so many years with Gil Evans, especially in Europe, when I started looking around, and when Mike started looking around to see let's get a list of the albums that Pete is on, and he showed me the list. I said, "Wait, what is this? I don't have a copy of that one. What is that?" And we looked and realized there was nobody had a copy of it, and Gil didn't even know about it. And,
oh my!
And we recorded a lot in situations where the band didn't know we were being recorded. There was one great concert in the late '70s in Tokyo. It was, I think, still my favorite concert that I ever played with Gil Evans for a lot of reasons. Without opening up a whole other story, shortening it, I had that particular day. It was in Tokyo, and I had just bought a brand new tape recorder, that was my souvenir from Japan, because they were cheaper there at the time.
Yeah.
I don't think it matters anymore, but it was a kind of a cutting edge portable deck, and I brought it to the gig, borrowed a couple of microphones from the sound guys, and I set up, and I'll just record the concert just for the hell of it. And it was this amazing concert, and years later I took it back, I transferred it to a multi-track tape because there were some problems with it. For some reason I had no bass on it at all, and I actually brought Jeff Berlin, the original bass player, into the studio.
Wow.
And Jeff is one of these he's a very creative guy, but he thinks like a machine. I mean, if you play something once, I mean, he could 10 years, he'll pick it, he'll play it note for note the same way. So I brought Jeff in, and I had him replace all his bass parts.
Wow.
I mean, playing along with it. And I kind of mastered it a little bit at the time. And I put it together as a project. I gave Gil a copy of it, and he was thrilled because he'd liked the concert too. And I talked to him about it, said, I should try get this to a record company, maybe we could issue it. And I think a few weeks later, I had actually played it for some record people to see if I could get some interest going. It was a little shaky. I mean, it was not great quality because it was a live recording and there were flaws, but it was nice. It was a really nice set. A few weeks later, I was in Tower Records and just thumbing through some bins, and I pull out a CD of it, Live in Tokyo. I got, hello. It's like, we never made any record like that. And I looked at it, I looked at the personnel and the pictures and the songs, the same. That was the concert. We have no idea who recorded it. I tried to track it down. It was an Italian record company or a Japanese production.
Yeah.
Somebody's probably taping off the board while we did it, and then they just issued it. Gil didn't know about it. Nobody got paid, obviously.
Yeah.
So much for my big
Right.
production of a Gil Evans album.
Stole your thunder. Yeah.
It's again, I'm going on the long way, but there's it's eventually evolved into I think it's a publicly perceived a perception or an attitude that any music that you see out there, it's okay to just take it. And it's again, this is not being done by people who are inherently thieves or bad people. It's just kind of prevailing attitude.
Yeah. Well, the technology is there, so why can't I use it?
True.
You know, and it's very it's a big temptation. I mean, I know
It is.
I kept telling my own teenage daughters, I don't like this, I don't think you should be doing it. And then I'll look on their hard drive and see this song like, oh, I'd love to have that.
Yeah,
Why don't you burn me a copy of that and go, wait a minute, now I'm doing it too.
It's the challenge, of course, that it's made the music industry rethink the way they're distributing music. Record companies are not, they're hurting it, they're feeling it now. I mean, they should have dealt with this much earlier. They're looking for ways to market music over the internet, and there is no simple answer to it. They just went through I don't know a lot of the details about it, but they spent millions setting up the system of grouping together and selling music over the internet. They overlooked one small detail. They hadn't made any deal with the publishers associations.
Oh.
The publishers associations said, wait a minute, you can't do that. We own the music, you don't.
Yeah.
So they're still working on that, but they'll get there. But the whole system of downloading MP3 files over the internet, some of it's done legally, some illegally, but some companies are finding ways to do it in ways that are equitable, which it takes some dealing, and it means you're going to get stolen from sometime. Like I have a reissue of a Christmas record that I did 10 years ago, which now I have out in my own label, and Amazon has it. And I gave them an MP3 of one of the tracks that you just click on it, you can download it. And next to it, there's a thing, if you want, you can pay $1 for this or not. It's a choice of whoever downloads it. And it's my choice to make it available. And it's not a sample, it's the whole track. And the objective is, if you like this, I click over there and for $15 they'll send you the whole CD. So it's a different concept.
Right.
You give somebody something and maybe they'll do it, and that that's just one independent person trying to peddle his own music.
Right.
Warner Brothers has to do it much bigger scale. They have to figure out how to market major artists without getting ripped off so badly that it's not worth doing it. If it's costing them $2 million to produce a CD, they can't afford to get ripped off too badly. So they've got to deal with it. It's a new world, and it started with the Mini Moog, which is really something. When the technology was put in the hands of just the guy on the street, the guy in his living room. The Moog synthesizer was huge. I don't remember what it sold for. It was a lot of money, like $25,000, $20,000, whatever, a lot of money in the 70s. But for $2,000, I could carry one in a suitcase, and I did all over Europe.
Yep.
I could do that. The Yamaha, incredible company, but they came out with a synthesizer, the DX7, right around 1980.
Sure.
which it's got lost in the shuffle, and it's
I
a
still play
dinosaur
mine.
now. But my feeling at the time was that it changed the industry. It
Uh-huh.
changed the music industry.
Yeah.
I played a prototype in Japan right around then, 1979, 80, and it was, I'd been using synthesizers a lot at that point, analog synthesizers, and they just completely rethought how this should be done with computer-controlled frequency modulation processes, storing sounds in memory. Nobody had ever done that before, and they just, buttons that you push with multiple menu levels below it. We take that all for granted now. I just looked at this thing. They let me use it for a concert, and they were showing, we'll hook it up this way. Here's your volume controller, and I'm looking at it, and I just turned to the guy and said, I don't know how to work it. And I thought I was good at
Where's
this
the
stuff.
dials, right?
Yeah, there were no knobs. It were just buttons. And so the guy gave me a demonstration. I caught on to some of it, but creating sounds, I did that eventually, but I couldn't do it at the time. So it was call them up. It didn't sound like anything else. It didn't perform like anything else. It was great. But and when it eventually got here, it had this system of, you could store sounds on a cartridge and pass them around, share them, steal them. That was the beginning. And I realized I got a couple of DX7s early on in the 80s, and I got a lot of session calls to do it. They paid for themselves quickly. And after a year or so, I started to realize that I wasn't getting some of those calls. A lot of the arrangers and producers that were calling me to bring your DX7, a studio started to get them, so I would just bring a cartridge of sounds, right, and plug my own sounds into it. Then I started to realize I wasn't getting some of these calls because the arrangers that used to hire me had their own DX7, and they would just bring it to the studio and play the part themselves. And so it's been,
Wow.
so this has been, it's really been going on for, I think, for 20 years or
Okay.
so, or maybe a little less.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me then that maybe this ride wouldn't go forever. But this is kind of what it's come to. It's technology has changed.
Yeah.
It changed what we do.
I should go back to just get your opinion on what made Gil Evans so unique
Oh,
as a musician and person.
that could take a whole other interview.
Yeah.
Well, as an arranger, as an orchestrator, his ideas, just the sounds and the textures that he envisioned, were, I think, unique at the time when he first started doing it, and they made the sound of some bands that he was writing for, like Claude Thornhill and so forth. And when he applied that to specific projects, like some of his own 10, 12-piece groups, and then, of course, all the great stuff he did for Miles Davis. I mean, just those sounds were, the way he used instruments, the way he combined instruments, the voicings that he did were unique. I mean, he had such a distinct style, but also that he was really creating textures. It wasn't just you're writing for. He never had a conventional big band. There was a sax section. You got 3-4 trumpets or some trombones. You got a rhythm section. Maybe he had tuba. That was a big deal. He never wrote that way. I mean, and especially he got into the 70s. He was, which is why he let me get away with all that stuff of bringing synthesizers into the Village Vanguard, where people were coming in hoping to hear sketches of Spain. And not getting it. But he was open to all that stuff. He thought the electronic sounds were fascinating, and he was into combining synthesizer beeps and barps with flutes and muted trumpets and French horns and tuba and an electric rhythm section. He was open to all those ideas, and he heard him. He wrote for them very effectively. He had such a tremendous impact on anybody in jazz who writes music or just sketches arrangement. Anybody who goes through that process of telling the guys what to play, what notes to play. But even if it wasn't a direct contact like I was so fortunate to have for many years, everybody is influenced by that to some degree.
Yeah.
That's one major influence or thing about Gil. Another thing that's always seemed very important to me is Gil was the way Gil put ensembles together, whether in the studio or for his own live bands. They were based on, he just hired people that he liked. He liked the way they play, and he would put them together in an ensemble, really without a whole lot of thought as to whether they would play particularly well together, or that is whether the instruments would blend together. Because he was looking at, first of all, the textures of getting the notes played, but also there was a spirit in the playing or an input from the players that he wanted to get. It was very meaningful to him. It's an individual player identity thing that usually somebody's putting together a big band doesn't want that. I mean, they want, 5 saxes who really blend well together, playing with the same head. It's just crossed my mind. Just a few days ago, there was a memorial service at St. Peter's in New York for Manny Album.
Yeah.
And the Village Vanguard jazz band, the Monday night band, played there, and these guys have been playing together of course, this is the one that's the grandchild now of the Thad Jones and Mel Lewis band, and it's a lot of the same guys, and the band is just so good, and they just all think and play and perform with the same. It's like one head. Sometimes somebody conducts, sometimes they don't even bother. They just do it, and the sax section blends so well. I mean, it's just great. That's the way you do a big band. Gil, it just never occurred to them. There was one European tour we did. The band was a little bigger than usual, but the sax section, Dave Sanborn, Arthur Blythe, Steve Lacy, and Howard Johnson, and George Adams. Now Howard playing baritone sax, and he plays it, but he's a tuba player. And he plays with a lot of spirit on baritone, but he doesn't blend with anything. Steve does what he does. If Sanborn, who was changed the way his instrument is played, but as they forget any concept of blending, it was okay. It was okay. It was great, because any one of them that would stand up to take a solo, it would tear the place apart. It was a great tour. But what an awful choice of 5 guys for a sax section. But that's what Gil did. He found Steve Lacy like way back. Steve was just wandering around doing. I think he was starting to do the Thelonious Monk thing that he got into and expounded so well, and Gil just brought him into a recording session, some big record date. Nobody knew who he was. He's this guy who played weird stuff on soprano sax, a weasel horn, Howard Johnson calls it. Steve was accepted into it. Even some of his recordings, like Sketches of Spain or Porgy and Bess, and it's great with the digital reproductions of them. They've gone back and dug out those masters, and in some ways the LPs sound real classic, but they were victims of. They had to do a lot of compression to LPs back then, so a lot of the quieter sounds were kind of squashed out of the pictures. The CDs, it's all there. It may not be the way you're used to hearing them, or you may have the way you'd rather hear them, but you can hear everything. And every once in a while, you'll hear like a second trombone player. You just got a couple of notes, just tie into it, and it'll come out. Again, this is not a guy who was a great blender. I don't know who it would be, but he was there because Gil liked the way he played. I came into the band, which I think is typical of Gil's attitude, first of all, getting interesting players. If he liked the way they played, if he heard a blues element in their playing or something soulful, you're in the band. I'll write a part for you. He liked me, which is I'm beyond honored.
Yeah.
So there was this aspect also where he would find young players or developing players and just put them in the band and bring them along and give them opportunities that were invaluable. I'm just invaluable. I couldn't begin to assess, even at this point, that what I got out of being in that band for that long, and the tremendous help that it was to me. Not just career, just it changed the way I think about music, about the way I play, the way I write, just everything. And there's still, it's like 12, 13 years since we lost Gil. I don't still never sit down at an instrument with a piece of score paper and without having some of Gil's influence show up in there. So there's what else? People a bit. Hiram Bullock, who came into the band at one point. Hiram's not a jazz player, and he's the first one to admit it. Gil, I think, heard a lot of Jimi Hendrix in Hiram's playing. Not the exact notes or the riffs, it's just the spirit that Hiram plays with it. And Hiram does what he does, and a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people didn't like it. Audience, but the band loved. We had a great time with Hiram. And Hiram, I remember saying, I said, man, I don't know what I'm doing in this band, but I'm here. And Gil wrote for him. He featured him. He just liked the way he played. And Delmar Brown was another one. And Delmar's a wonderful player. He's not real good at playing other people's music. Gil loved the way he played. You're in the band.
Okay.
that was.
Did people in the band ever go, what is he doing? Well, I mean, you just basically said it, talking about the sax players, but did you ever say, like, oh my God, now he's got this guy in here? What?
Well, Gil was an institution before I met him. He led the band. His concept was he wants to see where the music can go. That is the whole thing. That sums it up. So some nights the band was pretty loose, and some nights it was great. We had a bad night. Everybody knew it. And it happened. When the band was really on, the impact was incredible, which could happen for a lot of reasons. Sometimes just the just playing the arrangements themselves. Sometimes just a couple of guys in the band would really be up and would have a great night and catch an audience at the right time, and it was being in a pop concert. Right? As far as audience reaction is concerned, which obviously is not the bottom line criteria for doing jazz, but the band had a tremendous impact, and Gil did very little to actually direct it. He never told anybody what to do or what to play. If you didn't like the way you played, you just wouldn't be there. You'd get fired or laid off or something. And he very seldom. It didn't happen very often, but he wouldn't even explain why he was doing that. He would just, I got to change this, and it would change. But he never told anybody what to play. Once, great story. I got to remind me to do this if I forget. He didn't call tunes. He would sit at the piano and just kind of wait between tunes, and then he would just start playing something, and would leave it to us to figure out what tune it was he was playing, and we would eventually all find it, and the rhythm section would find it and get something going, and then he might or might not give us just a cue. Okay, start playing the chart. Well, more often than not, we'd get into the groove of the chart, and somebody would stand up and solo, and there'd be a couple of solos, and then maybe we'd play the chart. And this could go on for, a set that started at 11:30 at night at Sweet Basil, and at 2 a.m, Gil would stand up and look around and say, "Did we play an hour yet?" And that's it. That's the way the band was.
Wow.
It was wonderful, but having the key was having Gil there, and because of who he was.
Uh-huh.
He was so universally respected. I don't know. It's hard to. I don't know if I don't know if I could describe what a tangible thing that was at the time. But you couldn't. There's just no way you could be on his bandstand and play something jive, because Gil, he made a cassette of everything, every gig he ever played. If you played something jive, you'd hear about it the next week. So, I don't do that anymore. Don't do that. But it was typical. We'd be playing, some late night set at Sweet Basil on a Monday night, and somebody like Mick Jagger would be sitting in a dark corner, with glasses on, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. You just kind of, or Sting, you just listening to the band and go, wow. And it was just, just a bunch of New York guys playing jazz and taking far too long solos, and a leader who didn't want to lead. But it was just the respect. It was unspoken, but it was felt for Gil was an incredible thing, and partially because of what he had done in the past, but also, he led the Gil Evans Orchestra in that stage.
Yeah.
It went on to the 70s and most of the 80s. So it wasn't all based on Sketches of Spain and like a couple of good charts and a hit record. It was a lot more than that. And that one, I'll be quick. The one story that I was thinking of, we were in Europe, we were in Paris, and I can't remember why, but we had lost the drummer. The drummer had to go home. So we came into Paris. We were playing at a club. It was a big club. It was in a basement. I think it used to be a subway station or something. I don't remember the name of it. It was a long time ago. But we came into town. We had no drummer. Steve Lacy, I think, played the concert. I don't remember if he was on the tour or not, but Steve lived in Paris. And Steve said, he's got a young drummer he's been using in his own band. Why don't we use this guy? I said, it's fine. Sounds good. It was younger. He was a good player. But he was really nervous about that. But he was just totally intimidated by the situation, which can happen. The club, it was kind of this basement thing with all stone with the archways over our head. There was no seating. Everybody was just seated on the floor all around us. So we were in the bandstand, like there were people right up to the edge of the bed, just sitting there cross-legged. And we'd played a few tunes. And Gil typically wouldn't call a tune between set. He would just sit at the piano and think for a while, or he'd stand up and rock back and forth and sit down and start playing something. So we were in one of those minute gaps between tunes, like what's going to happen? And Gil walked over to this young drummer who'd been trying so hard, like reading the book, and it just wasn't working. And we all kind of knew that. It wasn't that he couldn't play; he could play it, but it just was not working. Gil just walked over to him and just looked him in the face and said, "Quit playing what you think I want you to play." That's it. And he grabbed the book, took the drum book, walked back to the piano, and he called "Gone," the up-tempo version of the thing from Porgy and Bess, which is a big drum feature. And it's all asymmetrical. It's not like the band plays 8 bars, the drummer plays 8 bars, nothing like that. It's totally asymmetrical. There's no way you could play it without the chart. But it's like, okay, we're going to play. We're leaving space for the drums. Do what you do. Just do it. It didn't work, but it was, he tried. But that line, quit playing what you think I want you to play. I mean, that could have applied to any one of us. And I was lucky he never said it to me.
Wow, good story.
Anyway, that was Gil. How long did I spend answering that question? I'm sorry.
He deserves it, right?
He was absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So it was like, I could say it was like going to music school, but it was way beyond that. He was like a mentor and a teacher to so many people, and a lot of people went through that band in the 70s and 80s, and I'm sure they would tell you the same thing, that their playing and their musical thinking is affected by the the time they spent with Gil.
Yeah.
And anybody that they've worked with. I mean, it just kind of spreads. And Tippett, I mentioned the memorial concert for Manny album. There was one for Gil at St. Peter's in the 80s after he had passed. And the place was packed like beyond its capability to handle people. There were, it wasn't just standing room only. It was like standing room like this, and the balconies and the entrances. People had flown over from England and Europe just to go to that, and then they went right back. They were just kind of looking around the room and realized how many people he had affected. And those were just the people who could get there that day. So.
Of the pop people that you've worked with, did any of them stand out as particularly memorable, enjoyable?
Oh, sure. They're all enjoyable. Paul Simon is one of my favorite composers, which is that says a lot. Just to be on stage with him and doing his music is great. Annie Lennox, that I did more recently. Annie's a wonderful singer, and I like her music a lot. It's performing it is a very restricted situation. Annie works out carefully what it is she wants to do, and she's very good at that. So the performance means, here's the record. We're duplicating that, and we're going to recreate it live, and don't stray, but at all. So that's it. I'm not being critical of that. I mean, it's a very viable situation. Certainly, as a performance, makes a great performance. I always thought Annie had I get a very bluesy feeling from her singing. I think that's inside of her. And I think she could probably stretch out and improvise a lot, and definitely hold her own. I mean, she's a tremendous talent, and she's got a great voice. Yeah. But she feels it's important to work out how she's going to do something, and then do that. And she doesn't want to stray from it. So of course it's important for her to have. You don't want a bunch of jazz guys in back and say, let's try to. I got a great groove for this. No, that doesn't work. But,
almost more like an actress would, more like scripted. Want to stick to the script.
A little bit. It's that is it. I would give if we could qualify it and make it a stage actress as opposed to film, because things can change. I mean, it's never absolutely pat in the same way. Otherwise, why go to a concert? It's better to listen to the record. Yeah. But to work out a show and know what's going to happen, and just work out the strongest way of putting the music across is that's more important for a pop artist, I think, than a jazz artist. Jazz artist, everybody knows is going to be different every time, so it's okay.
Right.
I think for somebody like Annie, the fans really want to hear it. They want to hear the song the way they just heard it on the record, and some of them would like it if it strays a little bit. A lot wouldn't. For Peter Gabriel, was also a tremendous artist and a very creative thinker. I always respected him for going out on live tours, big tours, supporting major albums. And he would just go with his band, and they would kind of do the same arrangements, but they didn't sound exactly the same. He was confident enough, to allow that leeway, which I think takes a lot. There's a lot of pressure on you. You're playing to 15,000 people. It's a lot of pressure, and you're judged by everything every time you open your mouth. Right.
With all the things that you do, if you could take a year off, not really off, and do the thing you like the best, can you nail that down? What do you really like to do the best?
it changes from, I think, from year to year, decade to decade. It was in the end of the 80s. I'd never signed a personal record deal before, and I did. I signed with Gramavision, and I had it in mind that I wanted to put a performing unit together,
Yeah.
and start writing some music and start fairly conventional, and maybe after 5 or 6 years try to break some new ground. Maybe I didn't know if it was possible or if it was possible for me, but it was a scheme anyway. The Gramavision had problems, and it didn't work out. They went under after a couple of years. I think during that period, it was getting harder to get a live group out there and find work. It was expensive. The tours that I did, I had to finance them. And they were to promote a record, but it was difficult to do. And in fact, I'd been in the music scene, the jazz scene, for a long time, for many years. But when you turn the corner and you become a band leader, a solo artist, it's kind of like starting from scratch. It was like, any PR that was done, it was somebody else's PR. It's easy to say, well, I want to go to Japan, but it's like, how many write-ups have you got in the press in Japan? Not Gil Evans or the people you were working for. See, it's you're kind of starting from, maybe not from square one, but square two anyway, and you have to work on it. And it was getting tougher through that period, so it was something I felt I wanted to do, and then I did it for a while, and then, okay, let me go back to being a sideman. I can't afford to be a leader for one. Of late, the last few years, I've been writing more and experimenting with some projects, most of which have been either difficult or impossible to sell or to distribute publicly. At this time, I think that's something that I want to get back to. Having gone, maybe it's some kind of a circle, but I know in the 70s I was a sideman and loving it, and especially hauling synthesizers and making weird noises with anybody who would let me do it.
Yeah.
So that's the beginning of a journey. Maybe I should have done this point earlier, but I think you get to where you get when it's time to get there. Yeah, I have a lot of ideas of projects that I'd like to create or produce. I don't know what will happen to them. This is not a great time in the history of the music business to put a record out. Record labels, big and small, are still trying to come to grips with the technology and figure out how they're going to turn a profit, and they're not signing things that they don't know how they can sell, and even things that they do know how to sell, they're passing. But this is something that I want to do, and I think has to come out of me. There's actually 3 or 4 projects that I've already started on that I'm not sure where they're going or what I'm going to do with them when they get to the other end, but I'm going to do them anyway. Physically, part of my plan is to, I was talking about Woodstock a while ago, but I was just kind of moving up there and getting into the woods and just connecting with the art community up there, because there's a lot of opportunities to just take it easy and develop stuff. And I think it's time for me to cast off some of the pressures I've been under of just being in Manhattan and maintaining the nut of a studio and $450 a month to garage my car. And I love New York, but it's an expensive place to keep a car.
Yeah, that phone better keep ringing to make that happen, right?
Which is okay. It always has. I've very few periods that I can remember where I was really hurting for work, and honestly, it's part of. I think I'm very fortunate, but for the most part, I've never gone looking for work. It's been word of mouth, and the phone usually rings. It's good. It's good. I am very fortunate, and I'm still doing stuff now. But looking back, I think I've spent a lot of time doing things that okay, I really did that one for the money. And
Yeah.
Somebody was asking me about something just this weekend. We were sitting at a bar, and I said, "God, I remember this project that you did. You remember that thing we did?" And I didn't remember what it was. And it was, I mean, I remembered doing it, but I didn't remember anything about it. And,
Right.
And why this guy remembered.
Well, it made a big
I
impression
don't
on
know.
him, but not on you, I guess.
Well, it was a job, and I enjoyed it while I was doing it. And it distracts.
Mm-hmm.
It distracts from things that you might like to do. And I've worked with several people over the years that I really think of as pure artists. Gil Evans is one, or Jerry Mulligan, or people like who just, I'm going to do this. This is what I do. And,
Yeah.
Gil was constantly turning down offers for professorships.
Right.
It just, no, I don't want to do that. I got a gig Monday night playing in Sweet Basil's. I can't be up in Massachusetts, so that's
Right.
it. Nice to strive for that. I can't do that. I can't be a pure artist. I learned that a long time ago, but it's a thing to admire, and it's a nice thing to at least model part of your life after.
Right. Well, I wish you the best of luck in
Thanks.
maybe arriving
Thank
in
you.
Woodstock and with whatever those future projects take you. It's been fascinating to talk to you. I think you could probably do another one down the road and see where you go. All right.
I could do one just from Gil Evans.
Yes. Well, we probably should do that.
A lot of road stories.
All right. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, man. It's good.